Hey, welcome everyone to this special edition of Live at the Nutmeg Tavern. I've got with me special guest, Brian Cushing from historic Locust Grove down in Louisville, Kentucky. He's been on several different episodes. You've probably seen him on, let's see, what did we do? We did fried oysters.
We made cakes.
Yeah, and
whiskey.
the distillery tour with the whiskey. Yeah, the peaches, preserved peaches, yep. Of course, that wasn't with Brian. That was
with Amy.
With Amy, yeah. So, do we have special questions already built up, or am I going to talk about historic Locust Grove, or is he going to tell me about historic Locust Grove for a little bit?
Okay, well, historic Locust Grove, we are a historic house museum on 55 acres in the east end of Louisville, Kentucky. At the time, we were actually outside of Louisville, out in the county. But we have the historic house and system of reconstructed outbuildings, and all of those work. The original claim to fame for Locust Grove, the cornerstone of our story, is it was the last home of George Rogers Clark, who was the founder of Louisville, the conqueror of the Northwest Territory during the Revolutionary War. The country wouldn't look like it does today if it wasn't for Clark.
And related to the Lewis and Clark.
Right.
But
his
not
baby
the same
brother.
guy.
Yeah, that was his baby brother was on the Lewis and Clark expedition, William Clark, and they were there at Locust Grove on the front and back end of their expedition.
Right.
So Clark was the reason the place was saved. He's still the cornerstone of the story. But over the years, we've had a lot of really amazing researchers that have pieced together a lot of other stories. It wasn't his house in the first place. It was actually his little sister's house. He moved there when he was older. He'd had a stroke. Had burned his leg in a fire and it had to be amputated, so he couldn't take care of himself anymore.
And Cron himself, he's a very interesting character.
Yeah, right? William Cron was the owner of the house. He was Irish. He came from Dublin, Ireland, around 1769. We used to say that he came he came over here and he joined the British Army. It's looking more like now. One of our main still living researcher, Gwen Potts, has been looking into this, and she thinks now that it's very likely that he came over with the British Army. Oh. He sold that commission before the Revolutionary War, so he didn't jump ship. But when the Revolutionary War broke out, he joined up with Washington's Continentals.
Right. So not only was he British at some point, but he fought on the American side too.
Right. Absolutely.
That is
there's
a lot of history there.
Yeah, and he married George Rogers Clark's little sister on or near the original Bastille Day in Louisville, Kentucky in 1789.
Wow.
So,
right. So how old was he at that time?
Oh, he was born in 1752. I almost failed algebra.
So he's pretty old by then.
Yeah, it's 62, 72, 82. He was 39.
He's doing math right here.
Okay, so I've got some questions that are starting to build up, but let's go ahead and talk about what Brian does at his site and what types of questions he'd be best at answering.
Okay, well, I'm the program director. So what I do, by the cornerstone of my job is interpretive programming. Now that does go into other like special events and things like that. But the main idea that my job was built around was interpretive programming that actually tells the story of the site to people who come. And we're really seeing special events, things out of the ordinaries. It seems to be something that's really picking up steam and is pretty popular with a way for people to discover Locust Grove these days.
Right. So one of the things you do is facilitate first-person interpretation. So
right.
People that are, interpreting as they would have been in that time period.
Right.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. We chose 1816 for the year that we portrayed just because it was a nice cross-section. It's like that older generation is still there. George Rogers Clark is still hanging on. William Cron is still active. And a lot of those old, the first generation major players are still there, still active. But then the second generation, which was really interesting in their own right, even though they didn't make the history books as big, they're coming of age and they're starting to do that.
Sure.
So we've got a great core of about, it's over 30 now, people who fulfill some very specific requirements to actually take on these roles as members of the family and people who visited Locust Grove, and we use that as a mechanism to.
And it's not happening every day, right?
No,
it's
no.
Just specific.
Yeah, one really interesting thing about building this core, a lot of our volunteer demographic were retired. And available during the week, which is, crucial. I mean, we can't run the site day to day without volunteers who are available during the week. And it's just a wonderful army of people who keep the place going. But the interesting thing we saw demographic-wise when we started building the first-person interpreter corps is they're mostly people who are either in school or working. So most of them are available on evenings and weekends. So most of the time you see first-person interpreters at Locust Grove, it'll be during special events and kind of an adjunct to that. And we do a couple of events that are centered around around them specifically.
You even got some millennial interpreters, right? Some
Oh, yeah.
younger people doing
Yeah,
it.
we
It isn't
do.
just a bunch of
No. As a matter of fact, I mean, when we first really started this program in 2013, some of the ones that I really felt like were carrying the flag were like, 6 years old, 9 years old. I mean, these were not just out there acting like kids. These guys were really in there doing the job. So yeah.
Sounds like fun. What do you think, Ryan?
Somebody said, "Man, that's a lot of buttons." I've got several people asking, "What do you need to do to get involved in reenactment? How does someone do that?" Oftentimes, we tell them, "Well, find a site to volunteer at or join a group," right?
Yeah.
But you have you work at a site that does a lot of things with volunteering, and you meet a lot of people in groups. So can you expand on that?
The first step is sending me an email, basically calling me up, and there's any number of avenues that could take. It could be first person interpretation. That's very much not for everybody. We also have a great growing historic trades corps, and they almost completely interpret in the third person, partially because a lot of the work that was done by Locust Grove was done by enslaved African Americans. So if you're not of that demographic, then we have them own that. So that's another way to get involved. And then we also have visiting reenactment groups that come, and sometimes that's the most appropriate avenue for somebody to be kind of direct.
And sometimes you have volunteers that are just tour guides.
Yeah, and that's one thing we're really working on right now is if you're into history but you don't necessarily want to put on the funny clothes and take on a character, we need people to tell the story in plain clothes. Especially at special events right now, and also during the week as well. And so pretty much any level of this that you're interested in, we've got a place for you.
Right.
Like I say, the first step is just asking. Just give me a call, send me an email, something like that.
And whether it's historic Locust Grove or a local historic site closer to where you're at, the nice part about it is they've already done all that work.
Right.
They know what they need. They know about what the history is. Many times the clothing is already available. So it's a jump start to that.
I've never heard of a site turning away a willing volunteer. I don't think, unless they just
surely they can find something for them to do.
Unless they couldn't get it, or they thought that they wanted to do it, and then it just didn't really work
generally
out
you would have to do something that would,
we won't go there.
You have to do something detrimental to the institution.
Yeah.
So are those chops real? That's number one question so far.
Yes, they are. I need to look 19th century more than 21st.
So people ask about this a lot. Okay, facial hair in during the time period, 18th to 19th century. Tell us about facial hair.
That's a loaded question. And no matter what I say,
we're gonna play Stump Brian today.
No, it's all right for you to be wrong. We'll just put this right up front. Not everybody's perfect about what they know about that, but what's your take on it?
In the late 18th century, most often you see people that are clean shaven. That doesn't mean that people didn't get stuck on the frontier and didn't get around to it, didn't have it convenient or something like that. Where that falls apart for folks a lot of times is when they have a nicely groomed beard and they want to say, well, I've been out on the frontier. Well, it doesn't look like that when you've been doing that. The bulk of the evidence that we have for most people in the late 18th century is that clean shaven was the look. In the early 19th century, sideburns started to come into play for fashionable people. And it wasn't just one concept. It's like a lot of people talk about the federal period, the Regency period. They're usually talking about 1795 to 1820. So that's 25 years of change.
That's a long time.
Right, yeah. You can't take one element from 1800, slap it with something from 1815 and expect it to look like anything that happened in history, in all cases. So you really need to really key in on what your actual objective is. I have some mid-19th century projects coming up this year, which is part of the reason I'm growing mine out so full. So that's kind of the short answer.
What I got from that is that you are a very fashionable person.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you drove it right out of my mind. Go ahead, Brian.
Somebody prays for chops like those every day. There was a question about what type of education is required to enter your field.
Enter my field. That's an interesting question too. It's It all depends on where you are and what you're doing. It takes persistence more than well, you do have to have some education. If you don't have a degree of some sort, then you're probably not going to be looked at. I ran into that a lot when I was first interested, but I really hadn't finished schooling. A lot of places ask for a master's degree. Conceivably, you can do it with a bachelor's degree as well. I only have a bachelor's degree. A lot of it is persistence. You got to keep showing up and doing something. You need to be in front of people's faces and actually let people see that you can do the job, more or less. It helps if you have something to set yourself apart, which is a piece of advice that my current boss gave me when I had her as a professor when I was at the University of Louisville. But there are so many people that are kind of clamoring to do something in the museum field that you need to figure out a specialty kind of.
Now you're talking about this as a profession, not as a volunteer. Correct?
Right. As a profession. Now, volunteer is easy enough. I mean, as far as education for that, we provide all that, and most people do far and above what's actually required because it's fun. We like being there.
Right. It's exciting.
Somebody asked, he's a Civil War buff. Any relation to Alonzo Cushing?
I don't know. I've heard that name, and I'm not as up on the Civil War as I should be. But the short answer is I don't know. There are English, French, and Irish branches of the Cushing family. So,
all right, John, historical fishing tackle. There's a question about that.
Yeah.
Number one, do we have any? Do we sell it? Number two, what do you know about it?
We do offer fish hooks and a fishing kit. Do we still have the fishing kit? Which has sinkers in a box and some
sinkers, linen line, cork bobbers.
Right.
I make the fish hooks. If you want a little bit of Ryan blood on your fish hook, then you can get them.
There are a lot of different fishing things. I remember the question that I was going to go, but I'll go back to that. So there are a lot of different things you could have. But those are just the things we offer because it's hard to ship a fishing pole or a giant net. And there is, of course, all sorts of different fishing going on in that time period, 18th, 19th century. You've got commercial fishing. You've got fishing going on with poles and lines. You've got cod fishing, which just has sort of reels and all these hooks on the line. You've got people spearing fish. There's just all that, but we don't do a lot of that today. You don't have to do a lot of spearing or whatever. Of course, some of the fishing.
I think regionally.
Right, exactly. Regionally, it depends on the place you're at, and the same thing is happening in the 18th century. Some places, very particular kind of fishing is going on because of the kind of fish they have in that area. But that's all I'm going to talk about with that. But I'm going to go back to hair, facial hair, just for a second, and. One of the hard things about researching it is we don't have photographs of regular people doing regular things in the 18th and 19th century. We've got artwork, and that's got a totally different concept. You don't generally paint pictures of people who, I just walked out of the woods and I've been away from my razor for a week. We don't have those kinds of pictures. So that research of knowing exactly what's happening with everyday hairstyles is a little trickier, hard to do.
Well, and that's when we have to supplement sometimes with written accounts of what people look like. And the bottom line is, it's like when we create these impressions, we base them on the evidence that we have. Not what could have happened, not what might have happened, not what makes sense to me that they might have done.
Yeah.
We base it on the evidence, a synthesis of all the evidence that we have, and then one day when it turns out more evidence comes to light, then we adapt accordingly.
And sometimes, people extrapolate a lot. It's like, I'm taking this half of a sentence and I'm turning it into this. Right. See, this is why I have this kind of beard. Well, that's not the best way to do it.
Right.
So.
All right. I've got Julian Regulators said hello. Brian said hello to Amy for all of us.
I absolutely will. Where's she at?
Julian Regulators is the name. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
And Ashley says that she loves all of the Locust Grove videos, and she's rewatched them a number of times. Thank you, Ashley.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on the more fictional or fantasy mixed eras of reenacting or LARPing?
It's not my thing, but I absolutely admire the work that people do with it. I mean, it's just as in depth. It's just as much work. It's just as much specialty. So if I can't really say anything more about it. I've got friends who do it.
It's something that they're interested in and want to pour their energies in, and more power to them.
Yeah.
It's just the only issue is when people get confused about what they're looking at. Right. It's like, is that a real historical based thing, or is that just something that you thought was cool looking? And I saw this one movie one time.
Yeah. I think as long as people are clear about their intentions and what they're doing, it's I mean, I've seen people put just as much effort and time into that as we do into this stuff.
So Brian, we've got these 2 glasses on the table. Let's talk about this for a little bit. What have we got here?
Well, this is just a little sample of the finished product of the Brandy. I can talk about this, right? In the upcoming film?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We're promoting. We don't know when this episode's going to come out, though, do we?
I think a week from Monday.
A week from Monday.
Sometime in
is
the
the
next
plan.
30 or so weeks.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Soon we'll be doing an episode that has to do with this. Now go ahead.
Right. So this was a real team effort. If you've seen the episode on the whiskey at Locust Grove, you know that we have a recreated farm distillery, but we're not actually licensed to distill there. So that doesn't mean that we fake it. We do fake it when we run the still. We just put water through that. But the stuff that you're actually seeing us do, and we do a mash, we're actually going through the process, and it's all good. It's all perfectly able to become spirits afterwards, but we didn't have the license to do that. Right. Well, one of our sponsors, one of the distillery sponsors, Kentucky Artisan Distillery, great folks, great partners. They brought up, it's like, well, what if we tried it out up at the actual facility? I mean, you've got for whiskey,
you distill it on site, but it's done someplace else.
Exactly. It's like what we have is just a barrel full of mush. Once it goes up there, they can actually do the thing there. Now they don't. We don't have a bottling or anything like that. So this is all just experimental research kind of stuff. So we can actually see how we're doing. Turns out we're doing pretty good. And so they were able to. One of the things we were working on today was we have just little industry sample bottles of the different cuts of the brandy. So we were looking at the heads and the hearts and the tails and all that. And so this is just a little bit of that sample of the head the hearts, the stuff that's
the real
good
stuff.
Yeah.
So we're gonna test this out here on screen. If you want to see the episode, make sure to tune in a couple weeks when you get to see this made to the greatest extent. So there you go. It's really incredible. I think it's got some.
Well, you were part of it.
You're right. It's got. Well, I didn't do the work. I just ran the camera. But an amazing, aroma that's coming off of this that you wouldn't expect.
The more I smell it, the more it smells almost like vanilla. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's a lot of fruit that comes off of it.
Aromatic.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's incredible.
So, Amy Liebert is commenting and asking Brian.
I think I know her.
He is going to bring Indy back home.
Well, I'm only allowed to. Like I say, they're little sample bottles. They're just for industry research, and so unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot that we can. Play around with, but it's like I say, we've been to the distillery. We can go to the distillery and talk about the research with the guys there. We just can't actually release the product from
It's amazing.
So we get to taste it. You guys don't.
I do also want to give a shout out to Alan Bishop of Spirits of French Lick.
You'll see him in the video.
Yeah, Alan is a longtime distiller. He's a head distiller at Spirits of French Lick right now in Indiana. Does some amazing stuff at his distillery, and he's also a great spirits historian for this region.
Yeah,
and
wealth of information.
Yeah, he directed and managed this whole the whole mashing process that you're going to see in the video later.
Give me the quick synopsis of apple brandy in Louisville, Indiana, 19th century.
Well, bottom line, and I think Alan goes into this in the film is your still is a piece of farm equipment. You've got fruit and you've got grain that without refrigeration you can't use it all before it goes bad. And so if you don't convert it into a preservable, transportable form, then you're going to lose the return off that crop. And so William Cron, the owner of Locust Grove, he had a mill, and he also had fruit orchards. And so without his still, he would have lost the return off some of his produce from the mill and from the fruit. So Brandy is when you have apples, especially that have fallen on the ground. And again, they're not going to be made into pies or
Right.
good for juice or anything else. Then by turning it into a spirit, then it can be put into a jug. You see, this is white. It's not been barrel aged. Out of 50 gallons or so of mash, which is what they would have been doing in there still. We came off with about a gallon of usable spirit.
So highly condensed
Yeah.
way of turning this crop, this would-be wasted crop,
Right.
into money.
Exactly. It's preservable, it's tradable, it's transportable.
And yummy.
Okay, so real quick, before Aaron gets into some donations, Brian, there are a lot of new people on. Can you talk about who you are, where you're from, and what you do there?
I am the program director at Historic Locust Grove on the east end of Louisville, Kentucky. We're a historic house museum on 55 acres, and the cornerstone of our story is that we were the last home of General George Rogers Clark from the Revolutionary War, and it wasn't actually his house; it was his sister and his brother-in-law's house. And so then from there, we've discovered a whole wealth of other stories. But what we're seeing here today, like with the distillery project and all that, all the outbuildings that have been reconstructed, all the working structures, they all work. And so we're able to use those to interpret work and interpret the farm. And the distillery was really a way to make the story of the farm exciting.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful site, amazing house, and lots of great research you've done there with the wallpapers and all that good stuff.
I always say we're lucky. We get to kind of ice the cake. It's like I've looked back at the stuff that was done like in the 60s, 70s, 80s when all these like earlier researchers was just trying to figure out who these people were and how they related. And they've really left us with a great wealth of information.
And it was one of those sites that would have disappeared if somebody was said, "Wait,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is important."
Yeah, Biden against Jefferson County was a developer who wanted to turn it into a subdivision.
Yeah. So,
And their website is in the description box.
yeah.
If anyone wants to
If
check
you're
that out.
interested in historic Locust Grove, make sure to check out the link down in the description box.
And definitely, I'll go find the video in a second, but check out the whiskey video we did with Brian. I think that was 2 years ago.
I think it was.
That's one of my favorite videos that we've done, for sure. So yeah, I got a quick donation from Keltoid 5.
there he is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keltoid 5.
Was it fashion or more of a regional / seasonal thing? Talking about facial hair. That's all I got for right now.
Well, on that, and we can couple that with another question that's asking for different kinds of beards or facial hair were people wearing? Was it just chops? Were you seeing goatees, mustaches, what?
You don't see beards in a fashionable context, even among the poor, in the 18th century, at least in the late 18th century.
Other than cultural aspects, you're taking
Yeah.
specifically of North America, correct?
I'm talking about North America, England, France.
Right.
Yeah.
And even in those, it's like you will see. In fact, it's like an identifier.
Right.
If you see a beard on somebody, a lot of times the artist is saying that's a Jewish person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you've got these cultural clues, and beards are one of those. That's one of the reasons why you see those differentiations.
Right. Well, and one other thing too that I look at is when you see something represented in a satirical format. It's saying something.
Right.
It's saying that it existed and people did it,
Right.
and they're poking fun at it, and
Yes.
it looks, in their
Right.
mind,
it's
ridiculous.
over the top,
Right,
And
yeah.
it's done, like Dutch people. They're always depicted in a cartoon as wearing old-fashioned clothing or
Right.
whatever. It's, but those do give you clues, but they're all over the top clues.
Well, so I think another, if you're really determined to wear facial hair, which I respect, an exception is like German military. The German military like their mustaches.
Sure. And I think you'll see some of that French and different situations. Again, those are little cultural things you got to click into in the time period to understand.
Let me get another donation real quick. David Dinelli, thank you.
Thank you.
How far down the Ohio River did people settle around the time Clark settled in Louisville?
Louisville at that point. Okay, let me go back up. After the Revolutionary War, Clark wound up with. He lived in a log cabin over in what's now Clarksville, Indiana. Louisville he had founded Louisville in 1778, and it was the westernmost part of what was, as far as like a port of call for the United States, and that went on for another couple of decades. There is. I shouldn't even get into this. There's a...
He could go on and on.
there is a really tangled affair that we've been talking about a lot that is almost impossible to decode. for me anyway, in the 1790s, when certain people in the United States didn't know, like especially in the Western United States, there was some talk of whether certain things, whether they should maybe ally with the French, ally with the Spanish, things like that, because New Orleans was still not like really under our under our control.
Ours,
So as far as the controlling of the shipping on the Ohio River was a big thing. So as far as American United States settlement, you're pretty much looking at Louisville as westernmost settlement at that point.
And wasn't even Clark looking at different situations there in that time period, saying, maybe I should ally with this other.
Clark was commissioned commander-in-chief of the French Western Forces. John Adams sent people to arrest him for treason, and they were turned back by the Kentucky militia. And after that, they pretty much dropped it. But no, he was going to be under arrest by the second president of the United States.
Very, very complex situations that we do not talk about today.
Well, and they were still trying to figure out what do we mean by what does constitute treason in this situation. I mean, we considered it a foregone conclusion, but it wasn't to them. So long way around saying that Louisville was pretty much it. But after the War of 1812. Then things really opened up. The first steamship came down the Ohio River to Louisville in 1811. William and Lucy from Locust Grove rode on it. That was a major.
And where did it come from? Down?
I don't know where the source was. It came down because they were only coming down at that point.
Okay.
So you had to come down the Ohio, down the Mississippi, then back around. The big revolution,
because they couldn't go upstream.
Right.
They didn't have enough power.
Yeah, the big revolution of that came in 1815 after the Battle of New Orleans. Captain Henry Miller Shreve was captain of the Enterprise, fought at the
the USF,
fought at the Battle of New Orleans, and after that he steamed the ship back up. So it was the Enterprise was the first ship.
Got to have more power.
Yeah. Back up the Ohio River. And
they only had impulse engines before.
Right, once he opened warp speed.
Yeah.
All right. There are people that are asking about what you're wearing. Can you describe what you're wearing, and also is it sailor based?
It is partially sailor based. My waistcoat is just kind of a common waistcoat. I wanted something just dark and plain and high buttoning because I like that. Yeah. My coat, I had been a part of a naval group at one point. I was a warrant officer, and I wanted to make something that I also had documentation for in the civilian realm, so I could kind of cross them over. And so even though it is a naval-based coat, I also had documentation from around 1810 of civilians wearing basically the same coat. So it's around 1810.
Can either one of you talk about the time period change from silver to gold-washed buttons? And why that happened? Was it a fashion thing?
Silver to gold-washed buttons.
That is the question.
I don't have anything specific for you there.
For that.
Hey, real quick, I want to throw the whiskey video in the chat real quick.
Okay.
For people to check out if they're interested. Super, super great information.
Yeah.
So, what is your? This is a funny question. What is your favorite part of making history more tangible?
Me? I think that's what clicked with me at first.
But what's the favorite part of that? In other words, aspects. I mean, what's the one thing that's like, oh, I like to do first person, or I like to do crafts, or I like to do the research? Or
I think for me, it's more doing like the work and the trades and the rhythm. I keep on coming back to that word today, but it's the rhythm, and it's so different from the rhythm of modern life. And as soon as you say that, somebody's going to jump down your throat. It's like, oh, you've got your shots, you got this and that. It's like, okay. But my brain just feels better when I click into that rhythm. And it's just something that I don't know. I don't know if you can really, I mean, people try to put a rhyme and a reason to why it is they like a thing, but it's like, for some reason, certain things just click with some of us. I think. And we have our reasons for liking it, and other people's reasons for not liking it are just as legitimate. So for me, I am in a better place when I'm in that rhythm, I think. So it's just what I'm personally driven to do.
Yeah, it must be. I mean, how do you feel about? I mean, there's researching history, and there's camping or whatever that you're doing as that. How does it feel to be able to walk around a house that they walked around in?
Really neat.
1795.
Yeah, especially when it's like late and you're the only one there, and you're locking up or something like that at the end of the day. And even though it was a busy place back then, just taking a moment to stand there and know that these people that we've put all this work into and that we do all this talking about, we're real human beings standing in the same spot that I am right now.
Or sitting on that porch. That's
right.
That's an incredible.
Yeah. That is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like this is
there's another question that's asking, what is the most exciting thing that you've learned in this adventure of living history and working at the place that you work?
I don't even think it's a. Yeah. I don't think it's a certain thing. I think it's once you get humbled enough to realize that you're never going to be done, which we were talking about earlier. It's, right. I think my favorite thing was just realizing that there is always something more to dig for, and that whatever we do, however close we get it, we've never got it perfect, and that there's always another level that we can take it to, and that the adventure is going to continue, basically.
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting aspects is that no matter what you find that's really, really exciting, you know that tomorrow there might be something just as exciting or more exciting that you will find, some discovery, and there's nothing quite like the mystery.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I read this one thing. What does that really mean? Mm-hmm. The raccoon or whatever, right? Yeah. It's like, what does that really mean? And you keep digging, and then it starts to bloom, or it's hidden back there for 10 years. Yeah. It's like, remember that thing 10 years ago that I read about and I couldn't figure it out? And now I figured it out.
Right. You've got to be excited about being wrong, I think.
Yeah.
It's because being wrong means that finding out that you were wrong means that you get to get that much closer.
Yeah.
So, this is probably something that you may not be able to answer, may not want to answer, and that's just fine. But people are looking for Locust Grove ghost stories.
There are no Locust Grove ghost stories. It's a very quiet place. When I was in school, when I went back to college, I wanted to say yes to whatever needed to be done just to stay in the mix, and that included cleaning the place. Which was a great experience, honestly, because I got to get very familiar with the place. But I would fit it in around. It couldn't be during business hours. It couldn't be during my class schedule. So whenever, depending on my class schedule, I was either doing it very early in the morning or very late in the evening. And I have been down in the deepest depth pit bowels of that house late at night in the pitch dark, and nothing ever happened to me. It's conspicuously quiet, almost, I guess, in that way.
And Ryan did touch on that as a kind of a touchy thing, because there are some historic sites that have to be very careful with that sort of thing. A lot of there's a lot of interest around that, and certain state organizations or certain organizations do not want to deal with that one way or the other, and so they don't talk about it.
So people are saying no ghost stories. They're disappointed for the first time in this channel, and our viewership is tanking. No, I'm joking.
But imagine this, okay? That if you go there, you can imagine it, right? I mean, it is a really, really cool place.
So this question, I guess the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Do you ever read about the Grindletonians, Seekers? They later merged in with the Quakers, or Muggletonians in any of your sources? I guess you see Wesleyans and Methodists more often? ?
So I don't you got know. There's I have not done a lot of research about sort of, I will call them fringe, just because in the drawing of these religious organizations, different Christian sects. I can get the word there. Anyway.
It's got a CTS, folks.
Yes, you can say it right for me. I've been drinking too much. Lips don't work right. They're on the edge, right? And so they are interesting things to research and to understand what's going on with these different things. And there are some amazingly interesting things happening in the early 19th century in North America with what's going on with religion. But those all had their seeds those seeds were happening in Great Britain and in other places in continental Europe. Even earlier than that, there's some just amazing research to do in that. In that same field, you read the Aubrey and Maturin series, and they talk about later on in the series. They talk about Sethians and interesting things. So there's a lot of great history there to dig into. And stop laughing back there.
I'm not laughing at you. Somebody wrote that this channel is very sexy. It's cracking me up. All right. What does a company party look like at Locust Grove?
Which is a what?
A company party.
Company party. It's fun.
Yeah?
Trying to think of what would constitute a company party. There's only a handful of us.
I know that we were there first thing in the morning in your break room area.
Like the coffee party.
And it was was nuts. I mean, things were happening quickly.
That is true. I guess every day is kind of like a company party in some ways. I mean, we get the volunteers in, and a lot of them come in once a week, and so they're excited to see everybody. We're excited to see them, and so it's a lot of us around there have been there for a long time, and so we've known each other for a long time, and so it's just a very
looks like a fun place.
It's a fun place to work. Yeah. So I mean, we're interested in our subject matter. We're interested in each other. We're interested in the site itself, and so I think I guess a company party is a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
So.
We get a donation real quick.
Yeah.
This is from Ben Gillies or Gillis.
Thank you,
Good
Ben.
morning from Australia, and
Hey.
thanks for all the great content. Thanks for watching.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, we were just talking about somebody from the Netherlands getting in touch with you because of one of the videos.
Yeah, when our first Locust Grove video dropped, the first person I heard from was in the Netherlands. Yeah. So it was,
Can Brian speak on what other home brewing or home fermenting was happening at Locust Grove in the time period or in the surrounding area?
Well,
which is probably a huge question considering where you're at.
Yeah, Louisville, Kentucky is, I mean, as far as whiskey and beer and things, well, of course, the beer really came in later with the Germans when it really got big. But the other documentation that we have at Locust Grove that could indicate alcohol production was what they referred to as the Apple House. So that could have been
Cider.
Yeah. We don't have a specific. We don't have mention of all of beer. It doesn't mean it wasn't happening, but we don't have any documentation of it. Of course, whiskey and brandy were big things in the region at that point. Prohibition killed brandy in our region. And after Prohibition, whiskey came back and brandy didn't, basically. And so you also had, and I think I might have to give, I think I got to give credit to Alan for this tidbit, but you lost a lot, innumerable varieties of apples because of Prohibition. Because before that, it was profitable to have an orchard and to have those turned into brandy, and that just kind of canceled that out.
Yeah,
So.
Today we think of apples as, you have them on the table, you're eating,
Right.
you're making pies out of them, and apples in the 18th century, in the 19th century, were really very tightly connected with alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's kind of what the scene looked like. I think was things make like brandy and cider being made from apples, whiskey from the grain, and that sort of thing. I don't know much about beer culture in our period in our region. I do know that eventually it got to be a huge thing in Louisville, especially when the Germans and the Irish and all those came in a little bit later. Louisville got to be a very beersome place.
Yeah,
So.
and it really is very regional in that time frame. What's going on with the popularity of particular drinks and the ease. So it's super easy to make cider.
Right.
And you got apples, you mush it up and you've got cider.
Pretty
You don't
much.
have any choice.
Right.
It's going to turn into cider whether you like it or not. And I mean the alcoholic version, not the non-alcoholic version. And then it's going to turn into vinegar.
Right.
So it's just what it does. So and beer takes a lot more work than that.
So,
Yeah.
Let's talk about your kit. Number one, how long did it take you to get a kit that you were happy with? And how much of that did you make yourself versus purchase?
This is me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'm still not happy with it. So
You're still not happy with it.
19 years in, I'm not there yet. But just because I tend to nitpick my own work. I started at Locust Grove 19 years ago, and I guess that was the start of the journey. And basically, I do sew most of my own clothes. My fiance, Amy Liebert, she does sew on my own shirts. I'm wearing one right now made out of hemp linen. And the problem is, every time you make something, you learn something that you didn't do in that project. So then you hate it.
Right.
And
It's like, oh, it should have this
Right.
kind of button, or I should have stitched it like that.
yeah, so then you got to go in and you got to do it again, and so it's just a continuous building process, and you're never done. So
And that's why you never start a thing with the actual fabric that
Right.
you want to make it
Yes.
out of, because you know you will probably make it 3 or 4 times
Yeah.
before you get there. So don't waste the good stuff right away.
right.
So this question is not necessarily about period anything. Somebody's noticing that you like your spirits and wonder if you have a favorite.
Well, I am from Kentucky, and bourbon is my favorite personally.
Do you have a favorite bourbon? All of the bourbon?
I mean, Pappy Van Winkle, it tastes like every penny that it is that it costs, and people dispute that with me, but it does. But you can't really get that much. But on the few occasions I've had to actually drink Pappy 20-year, it is like nothing you ever experienced before. Day to day, I love Evan Williams. It's just a nice, solid bourbon with some character. You know, sometimes you hit a price point just above that and it loses the character. Then you get a little bit more than that, and it has a lot going for it, but you can't really afford it all the time. So, yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. John, do you sell wool products?
Wool? Yes. Lots of wool things. Waistcoats and coats made out of wool products. Wool blankets made here in the United States. Lots of
Wool hats?
wool hats. Yeah. Yep. Fur felt hats, wool hats, knit hats, all made out of wool.
Somebody's drinking Evan Williams Green at the moment in their coffee.
Very nice.
So-
I've not actually seen that one on the shelf.
Wade, I'm going to come to your house for some coffee. John, this is a question for you, I think. They're wondering about middle-aged children and whether they'd be working or not at that point, and if so, what would middle-aged girls and middle-aged boys be doing?
Well,
Let's say this is late 18th century.
and feel free to jump in if you want to. Children were expected to be little adults, much more so. Now that is that's changing. That's changing through this time period from 18th century, early 18th century into the 19th century. We have this long transition to people sort of turning children into something that they would I don't know, what would you say?
Useful.
Well, early on, they're meant to be turned into adults very, very rapidly.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And then later on, there's much more care and the idea that, they should have this childhood that is what we consider childhood today. We protect childhood and let it happen. They were like, how quickly can we turn this into a useful person in the household? How quickly can they earn money? And there are a bunch of different reasons for that. And one of the reasons is that infant mortality rate we were talking about earlier. People didn't attach themselves to their children, probably, as much because they were likely to die.
Right. And I've also wondered, is some of that getting them to grow up quicker part of we're trying to keep them alive? Children do foolish things.
I think part of that might be that. That again, that's guessing. That's supposition, that we put into that. But
Yeah, that's
but
what
we
I'm
do
here
know
for.
that children were expected to have jobs, and they would go into indentureships. They would go into apprenticeships fairly early. Maybe you might not see that until it's 10 or 12 years old, until they can really do something useful. But even poor children that were put into poor houses, they were indentured out as early as 7, 8 years old. So they were expected to work for their living. That doesn't happen to every child, but it is certainly much more likely to happen in the time period.
I would say too that it's important to realize too that the Victorian period kind of established how we look at work and family dynamic. That's when work really got divorced from the home. That's when women's role changed rather than being a part of the cottage industry, the business that was going on. And so work was different. It had a different rhythm. It had a different pace, and everything's all going on right there. And so, of course, you learn to do.
Right, it's just natural.
Yeah, and to keep your hands busy and make something happen.
So work was happening right there in the home. But even when it's not happening, and you would, It's like, I can't support this child easily. He's 10. Hey, I can send him off, and he will do a job, and he will earn his keep someplace else. That happens.
So the second part of that question is boys and girls, different types of work. Let's do this one quickly.
Yeah. Obviously, there's much greater difference in roles of the different genders there in that time period. Obviously, I don't know. I don't think we need to go beyond that.
Okay.
Yes.
I've got 2 river questions for Brian.
Oh, yeah, river.
Were apples stored in barrels submerged in rivers through winter?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question, though.
We've stumped him.
Yeah,
You're an apple expert. Come on.
Just don't know. Yeah.
Well,
no, I don't know the answer to that.
Are you a river expert or an apple expert? Come on, Brian. And then another one is we've had a lot of people ask about pirates.
River pirates.
So being from a river town, has that come into your research at all? Do you know anything about pirates?
It really hasn't. I mean, I know it existed. It just hasn't really penetrated into our consciousness at Locust Grove. They were obviously dealing in shipping from Louisville to New Orleans and back. And again, once the traffic started going both ways, that really blew the top off of a lot of things. But river pirates just aren't something that's really
seen much.
It hasn't been a factor for us. Yeah. So yeah.
There we go.
So somebody is asking, what is your guest's YouTube channel? I don't think that you have a YouTube channel, right?
I don't personally. There is a Locust Grove YouTube channel.
Okay. Why don't you just run down the list of Locust Grove information and maybe personal information if you want to put it out there to anybody?
Oh, sure. And Hannah Zimmerman can jump in the comments if she wants to. She's our marketing director. But we're on Facebook. We're on Twitter, Instagram. Our website is great. And we do have our YouTube channel, which has a couple of neat videos of some things that we've done on there.
Any other blogs or anything like that?
Oh, we do have the Locust Grove blog. It's a WordPress blog, so you can get a lot of good information on that.
All right, good. Any information on mead? Either one of you? Yeah, mead.
Mead or meat?
Mead.
I've made it myself. It's very easy, but I don't know about it in our context, really.
Okay, you've made it yourself, huh?
What's that?
You've made it yourself?
I have. It's probably the easiest alcohol you can possibly make.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. Apple cider.
It's pretty easy too.
It's like,
it's all liquid in the first place.
Right. Yeah. You leave it on the shelf, and oh look, it turned into
right. So Amy is pointing at what I was trying to point out earlier, and she says Brian also has a blog.
Oh yeah, I do. Sorry.
Yeah. Tried to skip over that, huh? It's a great blog, and
Thank you.
I recommend it to people a lot, actually.
Thank you so much.
Do you have a link you can put in there?
What's the web address?
Mine's Notes from the Victorian Man.
Notes from the Victorian Man.
I work in the federal period, and I spend my free time in the Victorian period.
From the?
Yes. Notes from the Victorian Man .blogspot.
Okay, so that's what's going on.
Don't mind him back there.
Yeah, sorry guys. So were Revolutionary War weapons used in the Civil War?
I would guess
Kind of
yes.
changes happened.
I've heard some of issuing flintlocks to troops very, very early in the war. Obviously, it's like, we don't have, but I don't have much specifics on that.
Yeah, I was just happened to be reading the other day about it's one of the armories in the South. They had a bunch of 1808 muskets that were flintlock, and they very quickly had to take them out and convert them to percussion. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Like I say, I feel like I should know more about that.
You've disappointed us
once
all,
again.
Brian.
Apples and muskets.
It's about time to close this thing up. Let's talk about who you are, what you do one more time, and I'll see if there are any other cool questions that come in the meantime.
All right, I'm Brian Cushing. I'm the program director at Historic Locust Grove on the east end of Louisville, Kentucky. We're a circa 1792 historic house museum on 55 acres. The cornerstone of our story is that we were the last home of General George Rogers Clark from the Revolutionary War. It wasn't his house. It was his sister's house. But he lived there when he was older and he couldn't take care of himself anymore. And since then, we've discovered all kinds of stories of what happened there. We've got a lot of exciting stuff going on, event-wise, day-to-day. So definitely check out all those avenues.
Right. So there's a historic house. You've got a shop there that people can shop
Right,
in. You've got an
museum store's
interesting
great.
little museum.
Yep.
There's a great tool shed there that you can see all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, tools. We have our hearth kitchen. Like I said, all this is not being demonstrated day to day, but you can come and see it day to day.
Right. And of course, the distillery.
Mm-hmm. And we are trying to beef up that programming right now.
Yeah, so incredible site.
Do you have any events coming up that we should talk about?
Our book sale is this weekend. It's free. We got 20,000 books ready to roll out to it. They're mostly very inexpensive, and I've got to figure out where to put another bookshelf in my house because I keep shopping there. And in early May, in April, we'll have our Revolutionary War encampment. In May, we've got our Gardeners Fair. And the Hamilton musical is coming to Louisville. And so we are also, we have a number of special programs all through this first half of the year. Yeah, to kind of flesh out the historical side of the Hamilton story there. So
cool.
Hannah does a great job keeping all our stuff up to date on the website, on social media. So just check us out and come on out anytime.
Anything left, Ryan?
Yeah, one more. Oh, well, there's a donation just popped up, so we'll go out with that. But I'm going to ask you this. It's probably hard, but do you have a favorite part of your job?
A favorite part of my job?
Yeah.
Brandy tasting?
Brandy tasting is great. I love it when I get to go to distilleries.
That's also the favorite part of my job.
It's when an event or a program, when you finally see it's paid off and you see what it means to the volunteers who work it and the people who come to see it. You know, when it could be months of worry and planning and logistics coming up to that, but when you have that moment, you might feel tireder than you ever have in your life. But when you see what it means to the volunteers, what it means to the guests and things like that, that is what makes it all worth it, I think, in the end.
Cool. That's a great answer. We can go out with this, Aaron.
What did you have, Aaron?
So another donation from Keltoid 5.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. How often were period cookbooks original material, or were they more of a compilation of material?
Boy, if you look at the cookbooks, and there are a lot of different, there's two different things going on there. There's cookbooks that are printed cookbooks in the time period, and those many times would be copies of copies. And you're going to see the same recipe popping up, and it sometimes slightly changed, many times not changed whatsoever for 150 years, showing up in different ones, and they just copy it, and and then the real research, I think, is what happens when you look in the manuscript cookbooks. And there are some collections now that are online. They're only digitized in the picture form, so they can be very hard to read and interpret. But there's so much to research and figure out what's going on within the manuscript cookbooks. So imagine all these ladies and different chefs writing out their recipes, and that's where the real research, boy, that's a lot of work figuring out. So so there's so much to learn on that sort of thing. It's like in your job where you're looking at the letters, the handwritten letters. They aren't digitized, they aren't easy to read, and they take a lot of interpretation and fun work to do.
It is fun work, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you, Brian, so
Thanks
much
for having me.
For coming in on this special edition of Live at the Nutmeg Tavern. These discussions are always so much fun, especially when we got a special guest in. So thank you so much. Make sure to check out their website. A lot of great stuff going on there, and the videos that we've shot down there at Locust Grove. Make sure to check out the next couple of weeks when we have the Apple Brandy episode. That'll be great. Thank you guys so much for all you do, and thanks for watching.